else is important. You must have enough cash to get through life as a business. And so the example I gave you was Midwestern, right? And I said roughly you're paying about $60 million of the $120 million that Midwestern needs to run its budget. And I said you're paying about $25 million of that in a 4-week window in August and September. You're paying another $25 million of that in a 4-week window of December, January. And then you'll pay some over the summer. All right? And then they're relying on the state to give them money. Now, the state doesn't come in at the same time, so it's a little bit more complicated than the example I'm giving of what do we do with that $25 million that it comes in, because we don't spend it all in that first 4 weeks. So how do they maintain cash flow? Well, we talked about putting it in a bank account and investing it and earning interest on that. And that's important. That's one of the things that finance people do, is advise on how that should happen. Because you're going to need that money within a 6-month time period. So you can't go out and invest it in something that may lose value. So you have to be a little bit less risky, which goes down to number 3. It's going to have a lower return. But cash flow is what matters. Money has a time value. What does that mean? It means $1 today is worth less than $1 was 10 years ago. Why? Inflation. Now, we said that the government actually does want some inflation. They want 2 to 3%, right? So you know that every dollar you have this year, in a perfect world, would be worth 2 to 3% less next year. And so that's why you'll hear people say you have to invest if you want to have your money compound. Because if you take a stack of $100 bills and stuff it under your bed in a shoebox, or put it in a checking account, what is happening to it every single year? It's losing value, isn't it? Because of inflation. So you want to invest that where you're earning 7, 8, 9, 10 or more percent long term to outweigh inflation. That's why investments are important. And that's what finance people do. We're going to talk about that probably on Wednesday, is the investment side. The money certainly has a time value. And then risk has a reward. So risk has a reward when it relates to money. Because as we're talking the other day, when you want to borrow money from somebody, a bank, and you need to borrow a significant amount of money for a house or something like that, and it's going to be over 30 years, the bank is going to check what? To make sure that you are going to pay it back. And so they're going to check your credit. And if your credit score is low, that means you don't have a great track record of paying back the money on time. And so because you're a riskier borrower, how am I going to be rewarded if I'm the bank? Yeah, I'm going to charge you a higher interest rate. And if you pay a higher interest rate, you're paying more for it, but I'm also going to be compensated for that risk that I'm taking. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. So risk must require a reward. So in a moment, we're going to talk about stocks and bonds. But bonds are typically less risky because they are not bonds are more of a loan than they are an ownership stake. It's not an ownership stake. You just said, I'm going to loan the government, or I'm going to loan this corporation $500 of my dollars for 10 years. In exchange, I'm going to get my $500 back plus some interest. That's what a bond is. So because it's not risky, they typically don't have the reward that owning shares of stock do. All right. Now, yes, market prices are generally right. Let me finish this up. What I meant by that is, if you didn't catch it on Friday, in a capitalistic system, you as a buyer and you as a seller will come together to find what is actually the value of that good or service. Meaning market prices are generally right. Much more so than in a communistic or socialistic government where it's being dictated, the price point, by a central planning organization. However, oligopolies and monopolies mean that people can dictate the price, and that's why the government limits those. And so market price in a monopolistic competition is typically seen to be the right price, just like in your bike game. The customer is deciding really what your bike is worth. You're trying to dictate it, but they're going to tell you yes or no what the optimal rate is going to be. And then conflicts of interest, that's more in like terms of auditing and some different things. I'm not going to spend much time on that, but I really want you to be familiar with those top three. And then this. The three reasons that firms often fail financially. Number one is undercapitalization. Insufficient funds to start a business. You put together this whole business plan and you realize you need $500,000 to get this business off the ground and have enough money to float your operation for 2 to 3 years while you build up. You know, you put it all together, you run all the numbers, you need $500,000. But you only secure $250 or $300. And so you decide to go ahead and launch the business now, rather than waiting until you get it set up appropriately. You're starting off the business without the proper funding that you thought was necessary. So you're going to start cutting corners, and you're going to start doing things in a different way than you originally set out. That is undercapitalization. Number two, poor control over cash flow. We just talked about cash flow being the lifeline or the blood of a business. Don't write the movie pass. I don't use the movie pass example anymore. You must maintain cash flow. And it's harder in businesses that are seasonal. And you could call Midwestern a seasonal business, right? You're only getting paid really 3 months. You have to maintain that cash flow. And then third, inadequate expense control. That is, you don't have proper budget mechanisms, controls in place, make sure that people are not going over their estimate. Let's say, for instance, with Midwestern. They know their revenues, that their expenses, if they don't change anything, need to be around $120 million. So they put their budget together, and they come up that their revenues are only going to bring in about $118 million. They have a decision to make. They can either cut their expenses to meet their budget, their revenue, or they can go ahead and over budget and hope that enough people enroll and take enough classes to hit the 120 million instead of 118. And then if they don't get there, then they have to make a decision in the middle of the year to cut budgets, or they can dip into reserves. I just use Midwestern as an example because I think it helps illustrate. It could be any business. They dip into their reserves. Is that a way you want to operate your business? Plowing through your reserves because you didn't want to make the decision that needed to be made in the beginning? Okay, so not only that, but then you give your accounting department, accounting's a bad example, you give your marketing department a $2 million budget. And at the end of the year, they spent $3 million. Now you just compounded the matter, right? You're not managing your expenses. You have to have people monitoring that and holding the budget so that you can make sure your revenues are at least equal to your expenses. Because in your game, you don't need it, you have a loss, right? So you either dip into your cash and your stock price takes a hit. And so these are the top 3 reasons that firms generally fail from a financial point of view. Now, are there other reasons? Sure. Maybe your product isn't quite as popular in the market as it used to be. Maybe it's a technology company that's becoming outdated. And so you keep thinking our sales will be this and your expenses are that. And it just keeps falling in terms of your sales. So now you have to make some changes to your product. But financially speaking, you have to monitor this. And so that's the top 3 reasons. Guaranteed to see that again. All right. On your paper, I want you to have some space. If you're taking notes, I want you to have some space. And I want you to kind of draw it up here on the left, capital budget, put a little line in the middle, and then put cash budget on the right, and then leave a little bit of space at the bottom for when we tie it all together. I'm going to give you some examples of capital and cash budgets. So, capital budget highlights a firm's spending plan for major asset purchases that often require large sums of money. Some examples would be property, buildings, and equipment. I also want you to add, generally, one-time expenses. For instance, if for whatever reason this furniture, these desks were all falling apart and Midwestern was going to have to replace them next year, and they looked at it and they got a bid and they said, okay, it's $75,000 to replace all of these desks. They're not going to do that every single year, right? They're going to do it one time. It's typically seen as an asset because it's something of value. So that would go under your capital budget. Another example would be repurchasing of stock in your game. When you buy back that stock, you typically it's a one-time expense, and then it's gone. You don't have to make the same payment next year. Another example would be maybe you're going to buy up a $200,000 piece of machinery, and then you're going to just do it 1 year's payment and be done with it. That would be in your capital budget. Now, the opposite of that is your cash budget, which is literally kind of your everyday budget. You're managing all the cash that comes in and all the cash that goes out. Examples would be debt repayment, operating expenses, short-term investments, just things that you need to routinely run your business. Your utility bills, right? You know you're always going to have an electric bill. You know you're always going to have water. You know you're always going to have payroll. Those are things that would be part of the cash budget because they exist over and over and over. It's different from these kind of one-time expenses. I do like to ask the difference, where would this one fall? What are the definitions here so that you're familiar with both the capital and the cash budgets? this down at the bottom now. The operating budget, which is what ties everything together. Generally, the most detailed budget a firm will prepare in a given year. These budgets help understand where we're going to invest our money, how we're going to raise money, how we're going to manage our cash flow. And so you have to know how much money your marketing people are going to have so you know if they've gone over. You can't just say, well, spend and come back and I'll tell you when you've gone too far. You have to have a plan. You can always adjust it the next year. You're doing that in your bicycle game. You're spending $1.5 million this year in your marketing budget. Next year you want to spend 1.75. Okay. But you need to have revenues that justify that, or you need to cut some expenses somewhere else. So you're putting together this huge operating budget or the master budget. And in your bicycle game in a real world, you'd be saying, okay, we make $5 million worth of profit. We decide we're going to pay out a 20-cent dividend. It means we're going to have all this other money that's now retained earnings. What are we going to do with it? Where are we going to invest it? How are we going to raise money? Etc. And that's where we jump to here. We're talking about how do firms raise money?